The wind blew cold smoke over the hill, and people believed that it carried away not sins, but anxiety. Where knowledge was lacking, bonfires were lit, and each fire seemed stronger than any truth. Hello, friends. Please write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and wish yourself pleasant listening. I wish you a peaceful and enjoyable time. The village lay in a lowland between a swamp and an old road. The swamp provided grass. The road brought rumors. In those years when knights argued about debts and lands, peasants argued about bread, water, and pain. At the court of the local lord, a baby had recently died, and then another was born weak. People began to talk about witchcraft. Soon, every whisper was taken as a denunciation, and every bag of dry roots was taken as witchcraft. Agatha, a midwife, lived in the village. Her house was on the edge of the village, between a willow tree and a stream. She delivered babies and treated people with herbs which she had learned from an old mentor. Her voice was calm, and her hands were steady. Sometimes she took in orphans she met at inns. That's how she came to have a girl named Mira. She was found in a basket by a chapel. In the basket was a piece of thin fabric with a grapevine pattern and a small copper sign with a trefoil. Agatha did not seek the will of others. She told her neighbors that every life was worthy of care, even if it began in mystery. The girl grew up quiet and attentive, memorizing the smells of decoctions and the order of herbs in bundles. Agatha repeated that ignorance was more dangerous than darkness, and Mira remembered this. That autumn, a new manager returned to the village. His name was Oswald. He knew how to count money, collect taxes, and listen to complaints in such a way that the complainant left feeling guilty. In addition, a wandering inquisitor arrived from the north, thin and with a tired look in his eyes. They called him Brother Sebastian. He said he was looking for signs of witchcraft, but he spoke without shouting, and therefore they feared him more than those who shouted. Oswald immediately noticed that where there was not enough grain and too many discontented people, it was easier to restore order through fear. He began to whisper rumors. Black stones had been seen in Agatha's trough, and the smoke from her chimney did not smell like bread. The rumors spread and crouched to the ground like grass before rain. At the same time, Thomas worked as an apprentice to the blacksmith. He was considered a simpleton. He dressed poorly, rarely smiled, but repaired harnesses quickly and evenly. He often had parchments with notes lying around him. The blacksmith grumbled that iron did not need notes. Thomas did not argue, but in the evening he would go to the barn and write long rows of symbols on a board with charcoal. He had once served as a scribe in an abbey and knew how to read. Only 3 people knew about this: himself, the old librarian at the monastery, and a chance traveler who once looked over his shoulder and said that silence can be stronger than loud words. Thomas hid his skill because in those parts, knowledge of letters seemed unnecessary for a poor man, and anything unnecessary raised questions. One evening, a young stable boy from the castle arrived at Agatha's house. He handed her a sealed leather bag with the Lord's seal and said it was a gift for helping the steward's wife. Agatha was surprised, but the seal was real. The glue was not warm, and she did not open it in front of a stranger. He left, and only then did Agatha notice that the leather bag was not new, and the seal lay too evenly on the old leather. Myrrh suggested postponing the opening until morning. Agatha agreed, although her hand reached for the knife. That same night, the widow Marie's cow disappeared from the village. In the morning, a torn bag was found at Agatha's gate, and next to it was a bunch of dry belladonna roots, a charcoal doll with a needle and a knot of hair. The doll and the hair were recognized. It was the hair of the widow's daughter. Oswald raised a fuss. He told people that he saw a clear connection between the misfortune and witchcraft. Brother Sebastian remained silent, but ordered Agatha's door to be bolted shut and to wait. He asked for Thomas to be brought to him, because he had heard that he had a quiet mind, and a quiet mind was better than loud anger. Thomas came, looked at the leather bag, and said that the seal was real, but had been pressed with the wrong hand. He explained that seals from the castle always had a tiny mark left by the engraver, a barely noticeable notch. This notch was not there. He suggested that the seal had been taken from another letter, heated over a candle, and pressed onto the old bag. He also said that on the inside of the flap there was a trace of rosin, which the scribe at the castle did not use. Oswald replied that it was not fitting for poor people to discuss seals, and ordered Agatha to be brought before Brother Sebastian for judgment. Thus an ordinary bag became a threat to the entire village. People whispered that shadows walked in Agatha's house at night. Someone said that at night they saw a woman in white by the stream, and this seemed important, even though such sightings were common every autumn. Someone remembered that Agatha knew of a herb that would keep her husband from drinking for a week. Oswald exaggerated every whisper, so that fear would do his work for him. He hoped that Brother Sebastian would uphold the common will, and he would remain the man who was merely fulfilling his duties. Brother Sebastian was in no hurry. He said he wanted to see all the herbs in Agatha's house, find out where they came from, and what exactly the midwife had given the manager's wife. Agatha showed him the dried roots, leaves, seeds, and potions. She said that she had given the woman a decoction of lemon balm and thyme for her cramps, and had not taken any money for it. Sebastian noted that there were other herbs in the bundle at the gate. He told Thomas to write down their names. Thomas wrote them down. Myrrh saw Thomas's hand confidently writing the long names. She felt a pang of pride and anxiety. In those days, any confidence a poor man had was like a bonfire in the fog. Towards evening, the guard brothers brought the widow Marie to the castle hall. She said that her daughter had fallen ill after quarreling with her friend at the well. The girls had argued over a small ribbon. The widow added that she knew about the coal doll, not from hearsay, but because such dolls were made by blacksmiths to scare mice away from grain. Thomas was not surprised. He had seen them himself. But Oswald announced that the doll had been made for a ritual. He brought a witness, a herb merchant from the fair. The merchant said that Mira had bought belladonna roots from him. Mira replied that it was not she who had bought them, but a boy from the stable, and that he had asked her to keep quiet because he was preparing an ointment to rub on the saddle. The merchant waved his hand, saying that faces get confused, but coins are all the same. The people in the hall were noisy, their words clinging to each other, but the essence was not added. At night, a carriage stopped at the castle gate. No one was expecting guests. A woman in a dark cloak got out of the carriage, wearing a bracelet with that very trefoil on her arm. Her name was Eleanor. She was the widow of a merchant from a town on the river. Eleanor knew the value of rumors. When her husband died, the neighbors said he had gambled away his fortune, even though he had died of fever. She had come to this area on business and was staying at a monastery, where she heard about the witchcraft case. Eleanor asked to meet with Brother Sebastian and said she was willing to post bail for Agatha if necessary, and that her interest was not in mercy for the midwife, but in the order of things. She brought a chest with papers, seals, and money. She was a rare guest, an outsider with resources who intervened not out of fear, but out of a conviction that order is built on clear rules. Brother Sebastian received her. He asked why she was concerned. Eleanor replied that an anonymous midwife had once helped her, and that since then she had seen the seeds of evil profit in such matters. She noticed a fine notch on one of the castle's letters, and said that the scribe from the city had different notches. Sebastian looked at Thomas. He had already noticed the same thing. He spoke only after being asked and recounted his observations. Then Brother Sebastian ordered the old letters with the Lord's seals to be brought from the archives. Thomas laid them out on the table. He explained that the notch on the real seal resembled a small chip, whereas the disputed seal did not have one. He pointed out the different shades of wax. He said that the smell was different, a light aroma of pine needles, as if resin had been mixed into the wax. The librarian at the monastery had taught him to smell ink and wax as carefully as a blacksmith smells coal before lighting the forge. He felt uncomfortable saying that he knew how to do this, but he had no choice. Meanwhile, Eleanor examined the leather bag. She said that such bags were made in the city by bookbinders from goatskin. Tiny marks from the staples used to hold the leather during drying often remained on the inside. This bag had different marks, as if it had once been tied with string. This meant that the bag did not come from the castle estate. The lines were becoming clearer, but Oswald held his ground. He declared that forgery could also be part of witchcraft, which meant that Agatha was still to blame. Then Brother Sebastian ordered a search of the steward's house. He explained that he was doing this to reassure everyone. He said that if there were no traces of illness from herbs in the house, the suspicions would be dispelled. He walked slowly, as if he were laying out stones in his mind. He found the very same saddle ointment at Oswald's wife's house. Myrrh recognized the smell. The barrel of ointment was open. There was also a small glass jar with powdered rust. Next to it, in a box, was a skein of horsehair. All these things were common in a stable. But in a chest under the linen, Brother Sebastian found a bunch of belladonna roots, the same coal doll, and a strand of hair tied with a ribbon, just like the widow Marie's daughter. Oswald said it had been planted there. The servant swore that the chest had not been opened without the mistress's knowledge. The mistress turned pale and said that Oswald often put things away himself when she stumbled on the steps. She did not understand how it ended up with her. She added that recently, one ribbon for the widow's daughter was missing from the castle because she had been playing with her daughter, and the ribbon had disappeared. The shadow of the torch on the wall was even, but the words became uneven. Thomas was in no hurry to accuse anyone. He asked to be allowed to examine the gate at Agatha's house, the place where the bag had been found. He found a horseshoe print with 3 dots on the clay. Only one groom in the area used such horseshoes, old Harold from the castle, who asked the blacksmith for special nails. Thomas showed the nail he had in his pocket. It had a small head, tilted to one side because of a crooked shaft. The horseshoe print at the gate showed just such a tilt. It could have been a horse from the castle stables. If the bag had been planted during the night, then someone from the castle was involved. Brother Sebastian ordered Agatha to be released from the house, but forbade her to leave the village until the investigation was over. Eleanor offered her a place to stay at the monastery and brought her bread, water, and clean cloth for bandages. Myrrh went with her. There was a cradle by the old gate of the monastery. Myrrh stopped. Her face wore an expression that could not be hidden by her hands. Eleanor looked at the piece of thin fabric with a grapevine pattern that Myrrh always kept in her bag. She said she recognized the pattern. Only 3 houses in the neighborhood ordered such fabrics, one of them being Oswald's house before he went to work for the Lord. Eleanor did not draw any conclusions aloud. She only asked Myrrh to bring a copper token with a trefoil on it tomorrow. Myrrh brought it. Eleanor took out the same token from her box, only it had a scratch on the other side. She said that these tokens were given to her sister's family. Her sister had disappeared many years ago, and her child had vanished with her at the doorstep of a monastery. Eleanor didn't finish her sentence, but her eyes grew heavy. Myrrh understood before the words were spoken. She had once noticed that Eleanor had the same narrow fingers and dimple on her chin as she did. This inconspicuous detail suddenly ceased to be trivial. Thus, the first hidden connection was revealed. It was neither happiness nor misfortune, but rather the explanation that had been missing. Eleanor asked her brother Sebastian to check the monastery's records from the distant past, when a child had been found at the gate. The book for that year contained several entries about foundlings. One had a 3-leaf clover drawn in ink. The scribe added that the child had a cloth with a grapevine pattern. So the knot came together. Eleanor nodded quietly. She did not demand anything. She only said that now she understood why she had been drawn to this case. She asked permission to take care of Mira after the end of the proceedings and promised that the girl would not lose her home with Agatha. Brother Sebastian agreed, but reminded her that Agatha must first be cleared of suspicion. Meanwhile, Oswald was preparing his final move. He thought he could retain power if he brought another bag of incriminating evidence to the courtroom. He ordered the stable boy to place the bundle in the barn near the smithy during the night. The stable boy was afraid, but he took the money. At dawn, Thomas noticed fresh hoof prints with 3 dots and waited in the shadows. He saw a young servant boy carrying a small bag. Thomas did not grab him. He walked by and said that if the bag fell, it would be bad. The boy was frightened and confessed that he had been told to put the bag at the doorstep. He said that Oswald had given him the bag and told him to whisper that it was from the witch. Thomas took the boy to his brother Sebastian. Sebastian ordered the bag to be brought to him. Inside were the same herbs and the same doll. A ribbon was hanging from the knot, which was missing from the widow Mary's daughter. The ribbon had been tied hastily. There were greasy marks on the fabric of the ribbon. Eleanor looked at them and said it was grease from saddle ointment. By noon, people had gathered at the castle. Brother Sebastian explained everything as best he could, without raising his voice. He said that the evidence was too consistent to be a coincidence. He said that the bag at the midwife's gate was someone else's. The ribbon on the bundle was from the steward's house, and the dolls were made at the smithy for grain, not for damage. He added that the horseshoe marks led to the castle stables, and that the boy had been given money to plant the bag. Oswald tried to object. He said that the inquisitor had been deceived. Then Thomas took out a sheet of parchment with his notes, which neatly listed the differences between the seals, a description of the wax, and a list of herbs found in Agatha's house and in the steward's wife's chest. He explained that Agatha's herbs were safe for women after childbirth, while Oswald's were strong and dangerous if taken in the wrong dose. He showed how one herb turned the water a murky brown color if brewed for too long. He proved that the potions had been planted. Thomas was not a nobleman. He was an apprentice. But his knowledge proved stronger than someone else's status. Thus, hidden talent prevailed over status. Brother Sebastian asked Oswald why he had not reported the ransom that Eleanor had offered for Agatha. Oswald replied that he wanted to wait for clarity. Then an old guard came out of the crowd and said that Oswald had ordered him to close the guardhouse at night and not to leave until dawn. It was strange on a day when everyone was afraid. The guard added that the stable boy had gone to the marsh and returned at midnight. The picture was coming together. But at that moment, something happened that almost ruined everything. A dashing knight from a neighboring land entered the courtyard, accompanied by several squires. He said he had brought a letter confirming witchcraft in the village. He announced that he had seen light and shadows in Agatha's window at night, and that the shadows were dancing like in a bad scene. He said he had orders from his master, who was friends with our Lord, and that the impurity must be stopped. The people were frightened. Oswald perked up. He declared that this was confirmation. Brother Sebastian asked for the letter. Thomas calmly asked permission to smell the wax. The knight laughed. Eleanor said she was willing to bet 100 coins that the wax was not from that seal. The knight frowned and handed over the letter. Thomas smelled it. He said that the wax smelled like incense, as in a temple. But the seal of the neighboring lord always used beeswax mixed with honey from meadow herbs. Incense was only used in letters to the bishop. The knight did not know such subtleties. The letter was clearly a forgery. Thus, a stranger, a knight who could have become an executioner, became an unwitting witness to his own rashness. He was not a bad man. He did as he was told. But on that day, not only force entered the hall, but also scrutiny. Eleanor motioned for him to step aside, and he did. She explained that great men, like small men, can make mistakes, and that power without clarity is blind. The knight nodded silently and ordered his men to put away their swords. At that very moment, news arrived at the monastery from the librarian. She had found a record stating that many years ago a baby had been left at the gate, and a month later a letter had been delivered with the seal of a man named Oswald, who was then serving in the house of a wealthy merchant. The letter said that the child should be sent to an orphanage at another monastery. The record had been preserved. The seal on the letter was the same as the one on the disputed bag. This meant that even then, someone knew how to forge seals on behalf of those in higher positions. It also meant that people's destinies are intertwined, not from the day we meet them, but much earlier. Marie's widow told Brother Sebastian that many years ago her late husband had served as a stable boy for the very merchant who employed young Oswald. He once said that his master had a sister who had disappeared. People whispered that she had been sent to a convent to give birth in secret. This detail seemed like a rumor, but now there was a piece of fabric with a grapevine and a 3-leaf clover symbol lying nearby. It turned out that Mira was Eleanor's niece, the daughter of that very sister. Thus, the knot of kinship became the knot of resolution. By evening, Brother Sebastian announced that the charges against Agatha had been dropped. He said that now it was necessary to deal with those who had fanned the flames out of fear. He ordered Oswald to be detained until the case was heard by the Lord. The people murmured with relief, but did not disperse. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. There was little light left before evening. At that moment, something else happened. An inconspicuous man, who was usually the last to be remembered, stepped forward. It was Harold, the stable boy. He was considered a grumbler. He often sat at the gate and said that life teaches worse than the whip. No one expected him to take action, but he said he was tired of being afraid. He confessed that Oswald had ordered him to plant the items in Agatha's house and in his wife's chest. He said he agreed because he was afraid of losing his livelihood. He showed the money he had hidden under a rock. No one expected a confession from him. He was underestimated considered an empty vessel. But at that moment, he became the one who tipped the scales. Thus an underestimated hero emerged, who made the right choice at the right moment. Night fell quickly. People went home but slept poorly. Some feared that tomorrow everything would be turned upside down again. Others hoped that it was all over. Agatha sat by the window of the monastery cell. Myrrh slept nearby, clutching the copper sign to her chest. Eleanor looked at them both as if they were two halves of the same answer. There was neither victory nor defeat in her eyes. There was relief and caution. She knew the price of crowd outbursts. Towards morning, the Lord himself arrived at the castle. He was accompanied by 2 advisors and a scribe. He looked tired. He had recently lost a baby and was afraid of losing another. He told his brother Sebastian that he wanted clarity without smoke. He listened to the whole story from beginning to end. He learned about the seals, the ribbon, the stable boy, the false letter, and the strange kinship. He listened silently and did not interrupt. Then he ordered Oswald to be brought before him. Oswald stood his ground. He said he did everything for the sake of order. He claimed that if it weren't for his concern, filth would have spread. He added that no authority can stand without the support of fear, because people are lazy and greedy. His words were neither loud nor vivid, but they conveyed the weariness of a predator who had been prevented from finishing off his prey. The Señor replied briefly. He said that order is maintained not by fear, but by predictability. He added that if a subject does not know what to expect from the authorities, he will seek help from rumors. Rumors never feed anyone. The Señor sentenced Oswald to exile from these lands with the confiscation of half of his property in favor of the monastery and support for widows. He said that Oswald would remain alive, but would be deprived of the opportunity to rule over people. He ordered the money Oswald had paid for the forgery to be returned to the community treasury. He added that Oswald's wife and children would remain under protection because the guilt of one should not fall on all. It was a decision that came not from revenge, but from a clear choice. After that, the Lord turned to Agatha. He asked her to continue her work and said that from now on, every midwife and herbalist in the district would be listed at the monastery. He ordered rules to be drawn up. Every accusation against a midwife must be accompanied by an examination of the herbs and the testimony of at least 3 women who had received help and remained alive and well. He added that the inquisitor would be present at such cases not as a judge, but as an observer, to distinguish fear from harm. Brother Sebastian nodded. He knew that sometimes it was better to stand aside in order to see more clearly. Eleanor asked to speak. She said that she would take on the maintenance of a small school at the monastery, where girls could learn about herbs, writing, and arithmetic. She opened her chest with money and papers, and showed the letters that gave her the right to establish shelters and warehouses. It was the same unexpected benefactor, only now his actions had become clear. People were surprised. They were not used to an outsider woman making decisions so easily. but the money and letters were real. The scribe checked the seals. Thomas looked at them and smiled, as if he were looking at his own medal. The seigneur noticed Thomas's parchments and asked where the apprentice had learned such skill. Thomas recounted his story about the abbey and the librarian. He did not complain or boast. The seigneur said that it was unfair to hide an eye that could see notches, and that iron would not interfere with a man who could read. He offered Thomas a position as an assistant scribe at the castle, with the right to return to the forge when necessary. Thomas was embarrassed. The blacksmith nudged him in the shoulder and said that iron would not be offended if his apprentice became smarter. Thus, a hidden talent received a position that broke the simple ladder of status. Agatha asked that Mira not be forced to leave. Eleanor promised that she would not take her away by force. She said she was ready to be there for her as an aunt, and that Mira could live with Agatha for as long as she wished. Mira wanted to understand who she was. She was drawn to Eleanor, but the thread to the house by the willow tree was stronger. They decided that Mira would stay with Agatha and go to the city for the winter to study herbs at the hospital run by Eleanor. It was a decision that connected the two shores. Meanwhile, the widow Marie brought her daughter. The girl was recovering. Agatha gave her a bitter decoction and told her to drink plenty of water afterwards. The widow cried silently. She said she had thought the worst. She was ashamed of the words she had spoken at night. Agatha replied that water washes away not only ashes, but also guilt, if it follows. The widow understood. She brought a sack of flour to the monastery. The village slowly returned to normal life. But normal life had already changed. Women stopped hiding bundles of herbs in oven niches. They began to dry them in plain sight so that there would be no reason for whispering. The monastery posted a list of herbs with simple explanations. It said that belladonna was dangerous in large doses, but in skilled hands, it relieved severe pain during childbirth. That charcoal dolls were useful against mice, that the ribbon on the knots was not a curse, but just a ribbon. People read it in whispers, and then aloud to those who could not read. Thomas stood at the gate in the evenings and explained. He spoke as calmly as if he were shoeing a horse. Brother Sebastian soon left. He left a letter for the seigneur, in which he wrote that in this village he had seen how frightening ignorance is, and how simple lies are, if they are not checked. He did not renounce his service, but he understood that darkness does not live in herbs, but in fear. He recommended removing people from the bonfires and placing them at tables with books on herbs. His words were not spoken loudly, but they were heard. The seigneur made a small note in his chambers. In matters concerning midwives, first untie the knot, then light the candle. One day a young knight arrived in the village. It was the same one who had brought the false letter. This time he brought different news. He said that his lord had ordered that forgery of seals be punished as severely as theft from the church. He added that he had brought a gift for the monastery school, a box of parchment and inkwells. The people smiled cautiously because they did not believe him right away. The knight understood them and was not offended. He asked the blacksmith for a simple horseshoe and said that he wanted to remember the 3 points that could give away any horse. The blacksmith gave him a horseshoe without points and said that sometimes it was better to leave it blank. Several months passed. Snow lay on the roofs in an even layer. Agatha had a new potion with a label on her shelf. It was written in neat letters who should take it and how. Mira returned from the city and brought with her a small book that described pains and herbs in simple language. This book was written by monastic brothers for women and edited by Eleanor. On the first page was a symbol with a trefoil and a grapevine. It was not a coat of arms, but a memory. On one clear winter night, Myrrh sat by the window and thought about how her life had changed. It was as if she were walking along a narrow path, where each step was guided by small hints that had previously seemed insignificant. The patterned fabric, the copper sign, the strange notch on the seal, the smell of wax, the ribbon on the knot, the horseshoe with 3 dots, the groom's confession, Thomas's stubborn notes, Eleanor's silent participation. None of these twists came out of the blue. Each was prepared by someone's choice, someone's mistake, someone's vigilance. She remembered the bonfires on the hill. Bonfires were still sometimes lit for the winter festival, but now people said that fire was needed for light and warmth, not for someone else's guilt. When someone whispered about a new misfortune, they were asked to bring facts, not fear. If there was a complaint about a herbalist, it was dealt with in front of everyone, not in a dark corner. That was enough to make the smoke above the hill less frequent and calmer. One day, a man in a cloak came to Agatha's house. He stood at the doorstep and held a small bundle to his chest. He said that his wife was about to give birth and that he was afraid, just as his father had been afraid. His voice trembled. Agatha took the bundle. Inside was an icon and a small knife. The man said that his father had once taken part in a secret raid where someone had been forced to abandon their child at the gates of a monastery. He said he lived with that fear. He asked for forgiveness, not from those who could forgive him, but from those who would live on. Agatha did not judge. She said that now the birth would be her concern, and the sins would be the concern of those who bore them. Myrrh stood nearby and felt that the circles on the water would fade if a stone of truth were thrown into them. Thomas was sitting at the table with a pen in his hand. He was writing down the old guard's story about how to distinguish a real seal. He made brief notes from these stories for school. He did not like big words and long speeches. He knew the value of small things. When asked why he wrote everything down, he replied that people's memories were short, but paper was patient. He was not drawn to power. It was enough for him that no one in the smithy was looking for dolls made of coal and sacks of grain anymore, and that no one was left at the gate because of someone else's fear. He knew that his knowledge of letters had once saved not only Agatha, but also the very possibility of speaking the truth quietly. Eleanor continued to visit. She did not try to become the mistress of this land. She helped the school and the orphanage, made sure that midwives were paid and not just thanked. She sometimes sat by the well with Mira. They did not talk about blood. They talked about horseshoes and seals, herbs and measures. There was more tenderness in that than in any loud declarations. Eleanor knew that her family had been broken by fear and greed, and that the best she could do was to prevent other families from breaking so easily. The Señor was changing too. He did not become a saint. He remained a man with his weaknesses. But now, when a denunciation was brought to him, he asked the scribe to take out the book of herbs and ask the midwife. If the midwife did not know the answer, another taught her. People were getting used to a simple idea. Verification is better than fire. A year later, a boy was born in the village. He was named after his maternal grandfather. He was strong and healthy. All night long, soft footsteps could be heard outside the house. At noon, the knight who had once brought the false letter and then the box of parchment looked in through the window. He held a bag of coins in his hands and said through the scribe that it was a gift for the school for the winter. He added that he had heard that this school taught that fear was a bad advisor, and he wanted his people to know this from childhood. His words were retold briefly and clearly. Sometimes travelers came to the monastery. They asked for lodging and told how things were different in neighboring lands, where herbalists were still being burned. Then Brother Sebastian, when he was nearby, wrote them short letters describing what had happened in this village and asked them not to believe the first whisper. He did not become an enemy of his ministry. He simply understood its limits more accurately. He repeated one phrase: before condemning, clarify. These two verbs saved more souls than loud declarations. The village did not care. It lived as before, between the swamp and the road. The swamp continued to provide grass, and the road continued to bring rumors. But now there was a board by the road with a list of simple rules. The first line said that any item should first be examined, then judged. The second said that if you talk about a witch, you must name the herb, the day, the person, and the result. The third said that it is better to go about your daily business with clean hands and a clear head. Thomas wrote these lines. He was not a master of beautiful words. He knew how to put clear ones together. Mira once asked Agatha why people believe fear so quickly. Agatha replied that fear is easier than thought. Thought requires time, but fear requires only shadows. Mira nodded and asked no more questions. It was enough for her that she had an aunt, a house by the willow tree, a school at the monastery, and a road to the city in winter. Her life did not become a fairy tale. It became ordinary, and ordinary life after a storm seems like a gift. By spring, a new trouble had arrived. The horses in the stable had begun to die. People began to whisper about a new curse. But now, the widow Marie was the first to take action. She said she had seen old rotten hay lying by the feeders. She asked Thomas to write down that the hay needed to be changed more often. She brought her brother, who had once worked for a horse breeder. He explained how to ventilate the stalls. Rumors of witches did not even reach the rooftops. People laughed quietly at their recent fears, not maliciously. Life became easier without unnecessary bonfires. This story seemed simple. There were no miracles in it. There were choices. Every turn was prepared in advance. A piece of cloth with a grapevine and a sign with a trefoil led to kinship. A discarded bag and a sloppy ribbon led to exposure. A special horseshoe with 3 dots helped find the way. Thomas's hidden talent broke the ladder of status. Eleanor's sudden intervention changed the course of the conflict with one decision. Harold's confession turned the despised into a hero. An ordinary bag at the gate turned village life into a one-act thriller, but returned to normal because there were eyes, ears, and hands that did not want to burn instead of understand. The old fire circle still stood on the hill. Agatha sometimes went there at dusk. She looked at the dark stones and thought that fire was good for bread and warmth. Myrrh stood nearby, holding a copper token in her pocket. Eleanor sat on a bench by the road and checked the school records. Thomas was returning from the castle with a stack of new parchments. He walked quietly because he knew that loud footsteps left little room for thought. They all lived without loud oaths. They simply did their work so that knowledge was stronger than fear and truth was clearer than smoke. And that was enough to make the village below the hill a place where herbs were dried on bonfires, not destinies.